Hey, this is Jaxer from freeautomechanic.com. Today we're going to look at something a little different. You see I got the lawnmower behind me, and we've managed to come across this wood chipper slash leaf sucker. It's made by Agri-fab. So the story behind it's been sitting in the weeds for about 3 years now. I had a bag cover, but it didn't really protect it too well. So we're going to see if we can get this running today. It's got an 8 horsepower Tecumseh motor on it. I know your first thought is, well, see if the engine's locked up, grab hold of this handle and yank, make sure it turns over. But you don't want to do that. There's 2 reasons why. One, you want to make sure there's oil in the engine, and that's easy enough to check. Just pull this out, and plenty of oil, and it looks good. That's a good sign. Second reason you don't want to yank on that cord is if there's moisture or build up water in the carburetor, you're going to suck that up into the engine, and that's just going to cause a bigger headache and make it harder to start. And you can check and see if there's fuel. I'm guessing there's nothing. Yeah, empty. So whatever was in there evaporated, leaked out, whatever. Next thing we want to do is we're going to take a look at our carburetor. We'll start by removing the air filter cover, and immediately I'm seeing signs of rust and moisture, so water's definitely been into this thing. That's going to have to be replaced. Lots of rust. We'll want to clean that up because you're not going to suck any of that into your engine. Choke lever is good. Throttle's good, so those aren't frozen. They're not rusted tight. So we'll go ahead and remove the bowl. I already loosened the nut. And we can see there's all kinds of sediment in there, so the carburetor is going to have to be removed and cleaned. Yeah. Float valve's not stuck anyway, so we'll have to take this off and clean it. There's a vacuum line and a fuel line we'll have to take off, and the 2 nuts that hold the carburetor on. And then you want to be careful of the linkage. Whenever you take those loose, just gently turn it to the side and this will come right out for you. We'll go ahead and take that off and show you the next steps. And once we get the carburetor off, then yes, at that point, by all means grab a hold of this rope and pull. See if the engine's locked up or not before you take your time to go all through the carburetor. But at least at this point, you know you're not sucking in any kind of extra dirt or water. Some would go as far too as that right now at this point, they would just go ahead and shoot some starting fluid in here, yank on it and see if it would fire. Even not necessarily run, but just fire. That way you know it's got good compression as well. Myself, I still like to take the carburetor off first, just because I know there's moisture. I don't want it in all this rust. I don't want it sucking anything up in there. You can do the same thing, removing the carburetor, spraying some ether up in there, or starting fluid, and yanking on there to see if it starts. And if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you've got the lever in the run position. And then if it's something you're looking at buying, then you know, okay, it's worth buying. If you're just repairing it, then you're going to move on and do the work anyway. You see down there, I just use a pair of channel locks to get that fuel line clamp loose. 11 millimeter on the nut, and then Phillips screwdriver, and just crank. And to get the one on the back loose, still. Put the 11mm on there. I couldn't quite get a good turn on it, so I just used my channel locks to break it loose. And once you get the 2 bolts removed, then you'll want to twist it around to where you can get the linkage loose. And it just pops right through. And remember, that's how you took it off, so when you go to put it back together, it pops right back on just as easy. You want to remove this pin. It holds the float on, and then easily slide that up and pulls the valve out. We'll take a couple of Allen head bolts out, remove this plate, and get down to some. We'll have to wash this out real good, clean that up. Let's clean our jet. Should be able to blow through that and have air come through. Let's get started. Some people want to know, what's the best cleaner to use? Well, they do sell metal cans of carburetor cleaner with a little bucket that you dip in and out that's got holes in it, and you just throw all these parts in there and let it soak and then pull it out, and the parts come out nice and clean. Those are nice. They do eat up rubber gaskets and O-rings and stuff like that. You can't put the float in there. Now, some people like to use just starting fluid. Why not? It works. It cleans it up pretty good. It evaporates real well. If you don't have that, you got parts cleaner. You want to make sure it's the kind that evaporates, that doesn't leave a residue that just hangs out for a while. Those are usually more expensive. And can you use WD-40? Sure. If you want to spray it on there and take your time scrubbing it, you can even use just gasoline. You take gasoline, put it in a glass jar, and use a paintbrush. And it's pretty much like an old school parts cleaner kind of thing. You want to make sure you take all the safety precautions. You wear gloves, glasses, all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and get this taken apart. You can see there's a lot of corrosion built up inside the throat of the carburetor around the butterfly, so I'm going to remove this Torx bit, nut, or bolt. Remove the butterfly, so I sprayed some WD-40 on here on the shaft points so it'll slide out. Also sprayed some WD-40 on this pin. It's a little stiff, so I can get it to come out a little bit. Let it soak for a few minutes. There's a little bit of debris down in there. I don't know if the camera can show it too well or not. So that's where the fuel comes in. We'll make sure we get that cleaned up down in there real good, along with everything else. The valve itself looks pretty good. That's your shut-off needle valve. It just hooks onto the underside of your float on this metal spring. I'll say when it comes to the jet, a bread twisty tie is one of my favorite cleaning tools. The wire is nice and stiff that's underneath of it. Just use some wire cutters or wire strippers rather, and pop that off there, and you use that to just put it right in the orifices and clean that out. A little bit of spray of your choice goes a long way. Once you remove the Torx bit bolt, you can just use a screwdriver if you need to, or your pocket knife, pop the butterfly loose. And then the shaft will just come right up out the top. Then we can clean those parts and get down in there in the throat. And we'll do that with our wire brush. I'll take care of that real quick. I like to take and spray all the orifices. Clean out all your jets. And I like to take your wire tie, run them through all the areas. If you've got a straw on the end, you can just stick that straw right down into the passage. You just put it right in there, and when you push the button, it'll spray through, and you can check all your passages, make sure they're all cleared out real well. I'm not going to do it because it'll spray it all over the camera. To clean the butterfly up, you're thinking, boy, that looks pretty clean for an old wore out wire brush. Yeah, I did take it to a wire brush that was mounted to a power grinding wheel. You just want to make sure that you don't change the outside diameter, because that's what restricts the airflow. So it cleaned up most of the rust, where I'm not concerned with anything going inside the carburetor. But I'm going to go ahead and put a layer of primer on there just to keep the rust at bay. We'll let that set up and dry and start assembling the rest of it. Start by putting our butterfly back in. Get that in. Check to make sure it still works. When you're done, you want the pin to be able to slide in real easy. So you're not having to use force, pair of pliers, or anything like that. Then you can go ahead and assemble the float. And what I mean by that is you want to get your valve. You want to connect that spring. If you can see it, you want to connect that spring right onto this other spring. So it's hanging. You want to connect this valve right onto the spring underneath. And then you'll move it up here and make sure that this valve goes back into the right spot. It's hard to see here, but it goes in there. You can see the valve in there. Then you want to slide your pin all the way through. And then you're going to check if you can see down in there. So what happens when the fuel comes in through the side and it comes down out that port, and this float is hanging down, fuel will flow past that needle, fill the bowl until it fills, and then it shuts it off. And then it just keeps fluctuating. Now we can put the bowl back on. Make sure you get if you're going to reuse your old gasket just for testing purposes, which is what I'm going to do, and just put it back on there. Get your float back on. Put your bolt back in. Something I should note, you see the indentation on the bowl. The inside of it's a little different, a little lower on one side. shorter on the other. You want to make sure that you match that. See the horseshoe shape? You want to match those so when you put it on, they line up. And you want to pay attention that because this can move. So you want to keep it in the same spot when you tighten up. And now we've got our bowl back on. I've mounted our air filter plate back on. We just need to put it back on the engine and hook the hoses back up. So I put it back together, and just for testing purposes I left the air filter out. So you see that shaking around, and it does turn over, and it will crank over. As you can see, I took the vacuum line off of the outside here, and it's full of water. So it will make it a little more difficult because I did pull the cord. It did turn over, so the engine's going to be good. That's a good sign. But you can see we're going to have to take care of this as well. And this is what we're doing to remedy the issue. I just got my drill out. Drill a tiny hole at the bottom so that if it happens again, whatever accumulates in there moisture wise will come right out that hole. And if I need to plug it off, it's just a tiny hole, so it'll be easy enough to do. Alright, got her back together. Just for testing purposes, I left the air filter out of it. But filled it up with gas. Got our lines back hooked up. Just thinking about it. Doesn't hurt to give it a little shot of starting fluid. There you have it. Thanks for visiting freeautomechanic.com.